On Saturday, August 7th, about 30 people converged on the Park House at the Manchester Rec Park to hear from two speakers, K. Carl Smith, the founder of the Frederick Douglass Republicans and creator of the Frederick Douglass Republican Engagement Strategy, and John Clare, a Vermont businessman and a candidate for the Republican nomination for the governorship last year. They spoke on the controversial subject of critical race theory. The theory, first developed by academics in the late 1970s and not widely discussed outside of college and law school campuses since, posits that, among other things, racism is systemic as well as personal, that both private and public sector institutions have operated to suppress and deny opportunities for African Americans and other minorities of color to advance. The theory also argues that historical patterns of racism are embedded in law and that the legacies of slavery and segregation still create an uneven playing field. Critical race theory shot into prominence after the George Floyd killing last year and the Black Lives Matter protests that followed, and in the months since, some have become concerned that critical race theory is seeping into elementary and secondary education curriculums. This point was addressed by John Clare in his opening remarks.
Huxleyan, Orwellian, Anthony Burgess, Clockwork Orange, reprogramming to get rid of the systemic racism we haven't even proven existed yet. They've got a long way down that road in our schools. And 20 legislatures around this country are talking about banning this for the exact reasons I'm talking about. And then we're told, oh no, that's not taught in schools. Yes, it is. Oh no, that's just right-wing extremists. They don't want to talk about race. Yes, we do. Yes, we do.
In his talk, K. Carl Smith, a retired Army lieutenant colonel who lives in Alabama and who was invited to speak at the event in Manchester, along with another in Bennington a few days earlier, pointed out that critical race theory, in his view, portrayed all African Americans as victims and that all white people were racists, which he disagreed with. He also devoted time in his talk to emphasizing the work of Frederick Douglass, a former slave and black abolitionist leader of the 19th century. His approach of promoting dialogue and making alliances across racial and ideological divides was as on target today as it was when Douglass was alive, he said.
When I went through the critical race theory and trying to understand what it's talking about, there are several assertions that they make, this theory now. They make several assertions. I'm going to cover three of them with you right quick. Number one, that blacks are perpetual victims of white racism. That I'm always going to be a victim. The devil is a lie. Because God I serve is greater than that. I can't help myself. I need somebody else to take care of me. Because I'm a victim. How do we counter that assertion? We counter it based on the writings of Frederick Douglass. Douglass was in Boston. He was speaking to a group of abolitionists. And he said to them, stop treating black people like they're a special class of people. He said, leave them alone. You did not do anything special for the Irish. Leave black folks alone. Because your interference is causing him positive injury. The second assertion that I talk about, that I want to share with you, is that white people are inherently racist and have no redemptive qualities from being a racist. That white people are inherently racist. When I thought about that, I said, wait a minute. If that is the case, why do white liberals get a pass? Why do you get a pass? Inherently racist and have no redemptive qualities. How do we refute that? Let's go back to the writings of Frederick Douglass.
After his talk, we had a chance to speak with Mr. Smith for a few additional minutes. Don't you feel that critical race theory kind of provides some useful additional context for understanding American history? I mean, the fact that racism is a fact of life, really since the dawn of the country, really. And even if all the specifics of it you don't feel add up, don't you feel that it would add additional context to the education a lot of students would receive in school, and also the way people look at our society and how it works? Is there anything positive to it that you feel is a useful addition?
I don't see anything useful out of telling black kids that they're perpetual victims.
Do you feel that's what it does?
That's exactly what it does. I mean, I read the critical race theory myself. I don't think there's anything useful about telling white kids that because they're white, you're an oppressor and you cannot be redeemed from being an oppressor. It doesn't say that in that language, because the critical race theory is written in a very academic level. But when you really look at it and understand it, and talking to students who've got the training, that's what they're coming away with. So I don't see anything positive out of that, because all you're creating is racial strife and animosity between blacks and whites. That's not good. And to me, that overshadows. If anything positive can come out of critical race theory, I don't know what it is. That overshadows it in my book.
Well, the original theory, as I understand it, and maybe you know it better than was a theory that was first developed in the late 70s and early 1980s.
Taught in law schools.
And I'm sure you would agree that there was racism and racial disparity in this country before the late 1970s.
Yeah.
So why would critical race theory be responsible for teaching black kids that white people are all oppressors or whatever?
Because it's not true. My children are not victims. They're more than conquerors, and they get that from their faith. When Frederick Douglass, even though he was a slave, he never had a slave mentality. He didn't have an oppressed mentality. He always saw himself as an overcomer. That's why he ran away eventually. So, what I draw from the critical race theory is that when you tell someone that you are a victim and you need help and you can't help yourself, then therefore you left up to the instructions and social benevolence of somebody else to help you. And don't rely on God to do it. Rely on the leader. Rely on Fidel. Rely on the government. Don't rely on a God. That's the problem I have. Totally moving God out of the scene.
But the point of whether critical race theory is, or is being planned to be, taught in Vermont schools was debunked by Vermont's Secretary of Education, Daniel French.
No. I think it's important to acknowledge that this is the critical race theory activity is part of a coordinated national political movement addressed at local school boards, essentially. And it's a political activity that has caught a lot of national attention, more so in some states than others. But this is not a organic Vermont sort of concept. This is part of a national, coordinated, well-organized national political movement. And I think, every Vermonter should be firstly somewhat suspicious of any question that says we have anything centralized and well-planned in our education system. So every Vermonter knows that our system is highly decentralized, and that is one of the great strengths of our system, and that's local control. But just to sort of describe from a curriculum perspective, which is, I think, the central thesis of some of this activity, Vermont does not have state-level curriculum. At the state level, we prescribe curriculum standards, and that's done through the state board, and it adopts standards, and often those are enforced through regulation. But then local school districts, not schools, but school districts are responsible under the law for developing curriculum and coordinating that curriculum. It has to be aligned with state standards, but their charge at the local level is to coordinate that curriculum among their schools. So curriculum, there's no state level coordination or conspiracy around promulgating CRT. It's CRT, from a technical standpoint, is not a curriculum. It's a theory that exists essentially coming out of the law school concepts of looking at institutions and so forth from a critical perspective of racial justice. that's not a curriculum. It's really is not specified in our standards in any way. So, the first thing I would say, if parents are interested in the topic, and essentially, that's what this political activity is pointing to go to school boards. They're not inaccurate in that regard, because your school boards are the folks in Vermont who have control of our curriculum ultimately, and it's a great conversation for people to have. Parents, citizens, everyone should understand what curriculum is being offered in schools. But again, this is a national political activity being well coordinated and orchestrated. This is not, from my perspective, coming from someone who understands what's going on in Vermont schools, and they're calling this out as a problem. For the most part, I don't think these people are very familiar with what our construct is in terms of curriculum, or actually what's going on in Vermont schools today.
The speaking event was hosted by the Rutland-based nonprofit organization Vermonters for Vermont Initiative and the Vermont Liberty Network. For the GNAT-TV News Project, I'm Andrew McKeever.